Hello and welcome to our 2024 webinar for parents and carers of young people with special educational needs and disabilities who are learning in either a mainstream or a special school across the South Yorkshire area. This webinar will play for approximately an hour and is designed to be paused so that you can reflect on and talk to others about the information and ideas we'll be sharing. My name is Tina Harrigan-James and I am the co-founder with Sally Everest of Careers Collective. As a brief overview, my background is in teaching. I'm an English specialist and moved into the careers sector 8 years ago to work for a large charity called Advisor, then moved into consulting, specialising in SEND and apprenticeships. I'm now an entrepreneur with Careers Collective. I'm also a parent of 3 children who all have additional needs, and I have experience teaching and designing programs for children with a range of additional needs, including profound, multiple and complex needs, social and emotional needs, and mental health needs. We've designed a companion journal or personal guide for you to use during and after viewing this webinar. It's a PDF, and this is the cover sheet that I'm showing you now, so it can be printed or downloaded for use. Our intention with the PDF is to provide opportunities for reflection and a framework for development. There are also key links and information, as well as a more detailed biography of our business and the work we do with the Careers and Enterprise Company. We've included this slide for you to provide an overview of the mission and work of the South Yorkshire Careers Hub, which is part of the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, which has commissioned this webinar, and the Careers and Enterprise Company, or the CEC. These organisations are government bodies. The CEC is allocated a grant to deliver the National Careers Strategy's aims for schools across the country. We've highlighted just 2 of the aims of the organisation, so I'll read those for you. Targeted intensive support for those young people who face the most barriers, and local networks to connect schools and colleges to business and apprenticeship providers, offering meaningful experiences to students and teachers alike. These 2 aims are most relevant to your children, and we'll give you more information about the key people working for this organisation and how they support schools later in the webinar. During the time that Careers Collective, my organisation with Sally Everest, has been in existence, we've seen awareness grow around the ways that young people with additional needs can be supported and engaged in designing their own futures, which is what good career development helps them to do. Young people with SEND have huge potential and can bring an enormous amount of value to their communities, including the world of work. We are committed as an organisation to supporting the progressive work that's being done by the Careers and Enterprise Company, the CEC, to enable young people with additional needs to achieve their full potential. And we're delighted to have been asked by the South Yorkshire Careers Hub to create this webinar for you. As parents, our focus is always our own child, whereas schools must cater to the needs of all their students. To give you some context around the wider student population, of the over 9 million young people in schools currently, that's Department for Education figures, 4.3% have an EHCP, and that's up from 4%. And that represents 389,171 young people. 13% of young people require SEND support and do not have an EHCP. This represents 1,183,384 young people, and that's increased from 12.6% the previous year. Almost all of that 13% of young people are educated in mainstream schools because young people without EHCPs are not able to access specialist education except in very particular circumstances. And young people who are learning in specialist settings have needs which are becoming progressively more complex. So the differentiation of both planned and responsive career education, advice and guidance in every school setting is key to achieving the best career outcome for every child. This is something recognised by South Yorkshire Careers Hub, which is why they've commissioned this webinar. So this slide is showing the webinar outcomes, and we're aiming to cover these areas for you during this webinar. So I'll just read those through. What key language is involved in careers? What career development means for young people with SEND? Who the key people are that are involved in your child's career development journey? What career outcome opportunities there are for students with SEND? And strategies for approaching those next steps style conversations with your child. During this webinar, we'll refer to young people with special educational needs and disabilities as having additional needs, or we'll use SEND as a shorthand. We'll also use the word parents to refer to all adults who have a parental responsibility for a child with additional needs, inclusive of what we know to be a diverse group of people. We'll be covering the key language of careers through the webinar, starting with the word career itself. We understand from speaking with teachers, young people and parents across the country that this word careers can cause some confusion and concern when we're supporting a young person with additional needs. This is because there can be a limited or old-fashioned idea of what career means. We don't mean a job in a bank or necessarily even a paid role at all. For us, the idea of career is much more holistic and specific to each individual. To show you what we mean, we have two words to think about. We may all have had the experience of being asked what we want to be when we grow up. That word be usually means what job we want to do. Do we want to become a police officer, a train driver, or a nurse? We would rather move away from the idea of becoming something and think instead about being something. In fact, being lots of things, because we are lots of things. Thinking about careers in this way means we can look at the qualities we have rather than the job titles we might be given in the future. It reminds us that we can be many things. These days, people have more than one job or way of engaging with their communities using different skills and qualities. As an example, I once worked with a young man who had Down syndrome. He and I were colleagues. He worked one day a week in the same office that I worked in, and he completed a whole range of administrative tasks, which included shredding, making new staff badges, and filing. He was supported by a job coach. So we could say he was an administrator. That's the noun, the becoming, the traditional way of thinking about a career. But he was so much more than that. If we think about what verbs he was, the being, we can say he was efficient and focused on the task. He was methodical. He liked to check in with everyone. He liked to know where we were all working, that where we should be, that we were doing our jobs. He was very keen to hang up our coats, and keeping everything in the right place was really important to him. And that meant that the office was much more organized on the day that he worked. He was such a bright, enthusiastic personality that he actually changed the atmosphere of the workplace for the better when he was there. So he was many verbs, and he brought so much to the workplace, and he only worked with us part-time. So I imagine he was a great many more verbs on the other days when we didn't see him, but he was engaging with other activities. Here's our definition of the word career. For us, it's the way you choose to share your knowledge, skills, talents, and qualities with the world. And our emphasis here is on the choices we make about how we want to interact or engage with the world. That world could be very big if we want to influence millions of people with a novel or a YouTube channel, or it could be very small if we want to support a vulnerable person as their carer, or if we want to volunteer at our local garden centre just a few minutes from where we live. However we interact or engage with the world, we are going to use skills, knowledge, talent, and a range of qualities such as honesty or hard work. And we make no reference in this definition to earning money. We do refer in our definitions to well-being, for example. As far as we're concerned, a career covers so much more than what you do for money, and it's really about sharing who you are. This means that career development is about gaining and developing those skills, that knowledge, and those talents, and also identifying those qualities that you have. So a key message you could share with your child when you talk about careers is that everything takes work and time and effort. And even if we do have talent, we have to focus on it to improve. And that work is called personal and career development. And it's happening all the time, at school, at home, and everywhere in between. So I've got an image here of a potter working, and we use this image in one of our programs that we design for young people with additional needs to talk about what skills, knowledge, and talents might look like. We say that pottery can be a career. You can get qualification in pottery and you can be paid to create it. For example, there are places in Yorkshire which put on courses for beginners in pottery. Some colleges, such as York College, offer ceramics courses where you can learn how to make and finish pottery, and there are no entry requirements. An apprenticeship is another option where you're paid to work and learn the skills at the same time. And supported apprenticeships can be arranged. We'll cover career outcomes later in the webinar. Essentially, you don't have to have qualifications to be a potter. Around a third don't. You can learn by working with an experienced potter. We tell students that pottery can be something you do for fun, but we still count that as part of your career because you're learning, you're using a skill, and maybe you have a talent in pottery that you're perfecting. It may help you move on to another skill, perhaps because you've gained confidence and experience. We also say that there are many ways to share your skill, knowledge, and talent with pottery. As an example, you might share your pottery by selling your work or giving it away to friends and family. You might share by teaching others how to do it or making videos for TikTok that show people how. You might work for yourself or for a business that makes and sells pottery. When we talk to students with additional needs about careers, we ask them to share with us what they think their skills, knowledge, and talents are. And we've had a whole range of answers, but they've included things like rap, reading, guitar playing, animal care, playing video games. We had one student who told us his special skill was calculating relative formula mass. We've had drawing, being funny, being social. So there's such a wide range of skills and talent and knowledge and plenty of potential. There's a list actually in your journal, in your PDF. So what is career development? So we've talked about what the word career means, and we've referenced career development. So I want to look at career development in more detail. We've already said career development involves designing our future. That future could be the next day, the next week, or something we want to achieve in 5 years' time. For young people with additional needs, thinking about a point in the future and imagining themselves at that point can be really challenging. So a focus on next week might be more appropriate, a what now, what next kind of approach. And I'll just read the definition actually for you. So our definition, a process we go through, supported by experts like careers advisors and teachers, and the people who know us best, like our parents. So what does career development involve? So that process we go through involves essentially any conversation we might have with someone who knows us well or someone who has responsibility for us. So our teachers, our careers advisor, and our parents, absolutely in the mix there. It also covers any activities we might do which help us develop our knowledge, our skills, our talents, our abilities. So activities in school, which might be called preparation for adulthood, for example, are career development activities. The conversations and activities should be tailored to the needs and interests of each young person. For young people with additional needs, it's especially important to have the opportunity to experience as many different conversations and activities as possible, especially those we call experiences, like work experience, charity work, and volunteering, as many of these experiences as possible to really help young people understand what they feel right and comfortable doing or contributing, and so that they can start to see what makes them happy. Self-knowledge can be difficult for young people, especially for young people with additional needs. But the better we know ourselves, the better our decision making can be. Making choices and decisions form the second element on this slide. The choice simply to try something for the first time can be such a brave career development activity for a young person with additional needs. The third important element in career development on the slide here is reflection and review, making sure that a young person has the opportunity to think about the experience they've had, what they liked, what they disliked, what went well, what they learned is so important. That's the learning, and that's what an employer wants to know. They want to know what that young person has learned from the experiences that they've had. Lists of qualifications are not as impressive as being able to share what we've learned. So what does career development involve? But two more elements here. Development. So this is all about moving forward and making progress. So career development involves setting goals. There's some guidance for you in your PDF around goal setting so that you can support your child on pages 12 and 13. And then also on this slide, keeping safe and healthy is vital. So I mentioned well-being earlier as being a really key aspect of the way that we as an organisation define careers and career development. If we are not keeping safe and healthy and well, we can't reach our potential. So it's an important conversation to have with your child as they try new experiences and develop as a person. And again, there's support in your PDF on page 14 for that. So there's a tiny history lesson here in the webinar. These are some of the things that the government's National Career Strategy states that every state school, not private ones, every state school has to do. So the National Career Service was launched in 2012 and it was revised in 2017. So the revision was to make sure that there's what's called independent provision of information, advice and guidance, as well as including what's called the Gatsby benchmarks. More on those in a minute. So in 2014, a new government agency was launched. That's the Careers and Enterprise Company that I've already mentioned, the CEC, in order to support schools with their career provision and their engagement with employers. That year also saw the publication of the Gatsby Foundation report on good career guidance. So the first statutory element is provider access. So that means that all schools need to make sure, and this is state schools, remember, that other organisations are able to share with students the different opportunities that might be available. So an FE college might be able to come, or a careers fair might be organised, which includes local apprenticeship providers. The second element there refers to a policy about provider access, which should be published on every school website. And Ofsted's also checking this. So which key people are involved? As I mentioned earlier that I would go through this, because it sometimes can be confusing for parents to understand who's responsible for what. So we'll go through for you here the types of people who are supporting your child with their career development. We've put the young person in the centre because they are the focus of this team. So we've got top left there, the careers lead or leader, and there's somebody who manages the school's careers education programme. So they should really be in the senior team at the school, and they are responsible for reporting on progress and outcomes for all the students in the school. And that's the person you should ask to speak to about the careers education programme at the school. And the details for that should be on the school website. Then at the top right there, in the blue box, you've got the careers advisor. That person should be qualified to level 6, or they should be in training for that qualification. And they're responsible for delivering the careers advice and guidance to students. And that, as I mentioned before, should be independent. This person might work in multiple schools. So they should see your child once before they finish year 11. And once before the end of year 13 if they're still in school. If the school pays for this service, and sometimes they'll train an in-house member of staff to deliver it. So some careers advisors are working for a different body and hired by the school and work across different schools, and some careers advisors work within a school exclusively. And the careers advisor is the person you should speak to if you've got questions about the options and pathways that are available for your child, or if you'd like more support with that. So those two at the top there, they're the two key school-based members of staff who work closely together. However, all the teaching staff, all the educators, and I've got those there in pink, they're expected to get involved in some way in delivering the careers education programme. So they're meant to, for example, share with students the links between their subject and a range of possible careers. Then I've also got their employers in yellow at the bottom right. So it's another key part of the team around every young person, because they provide a range of career activities and experiences. Some employers are able to deliver workshops and run competitions or enterprise challenges. Others present assemblies, some provide mentors, and some work experience placements. All of these things are called employer encounters, and every young person has to have one of these types of encounters every year. Then you've got the enterprise advisor at the bottom there on the left, sometimes called the EA. This person is a volunteer from the local community, and they're recruited by the CEC, the Careers and Enterprise Company. Ideally, they've got an excellent network, and they've got a role in a business that's local to the school. Their purpose is to support the careers leader with their work, so the strategic work, and link the school with local businesses so students can then have those employer encounters. There's usually one enterprise advisor or EA per school, unless the school is large. Sometimes it can be challenging to recruit that EA. It depends on the location of the school, for example. And then you see there, I've included parents and carers, because it's the key knowledge and support that parents and carers can provide around their child can really make a difference to the way that all of those other professionals and stakeholders can act around supporting that young person. So Gatsby benchmarks I've mentioned already, and here they are. There are 8 of them. The benchmarks are the result of an international independent review of career guidance conducted by Professor Sir John Holman for the Gatsby Charitable Foundation. So he travelled to different countries and identified what good looks like for careers education, and then essentially brought it all back and put it in a report. And that work led to this framework for schools to use in order to establish quality careers provision. So I'll go through them all for you. So we've got here a stable careers programme. So the top one there on the left, that should be planned and published and regularly evaluated. You should be able to read it on school websites, I've already mentioned, and knowing what topics your child's experiencing on a term-by-term basis means that you'll be able to support from home. So I'm a parent, as I said already, and I know how busy term is, so I try to keep up by putting topics in my phone calendar or on post-its, so I can remember just to ask really how my children are finding the careers lessons and see if there's anything I can pick up on. Often it's the visiting speakers or the visits that students remember and respond to the most. So an example would be that my eldest experienced a STEM presentation from a local employer, and that was very clear then that she absolutely didn't want to work in any of the jobs that were featured. So narrowing down the options is a really important part of the career development process, so understanding what you don't actually want to pursue, because there are so many careers options that the choices can be overwhelming. And she later actually visited a laboratory with her forensic science BTEC class and came home raving about it. So that demonstrated something that she felt positive and wanted to look into more. Schools that are really transparent about what events are planned really help parents, because that means that we can ask preparation and follow-up questions, and that really helps our children to make the most of every experience that they have. So then also on the slide, you've got learning from career and labour market information. I'll forward a little bit so that you can get a little bit more information on that. So labour market information is sometimes called LMI. And it just means any good quality information about future study options and career opportunities, such as what courses are on offer locally, which employers are hiring young people, or what salaries are paid for specific jobs. If young people don't know what's available, they'll only have a narrow view of what's possible. The careers advisor is the person who'll be able to share appropriate LMI with schools, to young people as well, and to parents. There are extensive studies done by organisations like Warwick University and Sheffield Hallam University, and a careers advisor will take from those studies what's relevant. And you'll find further information and detail about LMI on page 17 of your PDF. So just moving on to two more. So we've done Gatsby Benchmark 1 and 2, now we're on 3 and 4. So the third one there, addressing the needs of each pupil. So careers education should be adapted as far as possible to meet the needs of each individual child. So remember, any activity or learning which prepares a young person for life beyond school is careers education. So those preparation for adulthood lessons, anything on financial literacy, enterprise competition, a visit from a local employer, they're all part of that careers education package. These elements need to be appropriate for the learning needs and career aspirations of your child. Fourth one there on this slide, linking curriculum learning to careers. It can be a tricky benchmark for schools to achieve, because subject teachers are extremely busy teaching. But the curriculum, they have to make an effort to ensure that students achieve their potential in that subject. However, knowing your studies are relevant in the real world and how the skills that are being learned in the classroom can be used outside of the school or used on a specific job can really support learning, engagement and motivation. I teach business studies A-level part-time, which means I've just set homework actually for my students to find out how the organisations that their parents work for are structured and why or how that structure works, because business structure is part of the curriculum. But this means that my students will be having a careers conversation with a parent or a family member about their workplace, which is going to help them find more about the world of work. And they'll be sharing what they've discovered back in class. So everyone's going to benefit from those conversations, and they'll all find out about multiple businesses operating in the local area. So that's an example of how a classroom teacher, a subject teacher, can follow the curriculum, but at the same time make those really valuable links to the world of work and to careers. So benchmarks 5 and 6. So we've got their encounters with employers and employees. So it's really important, as I've already mentioned, for young people to engage with employers, to help them become inspired about the world of work and understand more fully about what's involved. And engagement can be such a simple and low-cost activity for an employer. Some employers, especially small businesses, are usually more than happy to create short introduction videos, perhaps on a mobile phone, for students to watch, or a quick sort of 360-degree tour of their premises. And employers can send materials into school for students to experience, sort of promotional materials, brochures, leaflets, that kind of thing. Any stimulus can provoke thoughts and questions and could set up a conversation between an employer and the students. And then also on the slide, we've got experiences of workplaces, which I've also mentioned previously. Really important, and it's based on research, and the research suggests that 100 hours of work experience across the secondary school period leads to a 4-fold decrease in the likelihood of a student failing to gain a job or a training place after leaving school. So very clear correlation between the two. So the CEC has created an employer network called the Cornerstone Network, which aims to engage a wide range of employers. So the South Yorkshire Careers Hub also have a network of employers based across South Yorkshire, and they're also known as Cornerstones. And together they aim to strategically work to champion social mobility and provide high quality even career outreach and opportunities for young people aligned to the local economy. Sometimes there are issues with work experience. Many schools ask parents to organise work experience, and unless you've got a great network, this can be challenging. It's even more challenging for young people with additional needs who may have mental or physical health issues. However, there are innovative ways of providing young people with work experience without requiring them to physically travel to a workplace. Encounters and experiences on this slide do sound similar. So the difference between the two are that for an experience, the young person has to be involved somehow in the work itself. So work shadowing or visiting a workplace, for example. But there are other elements, such as completing a workplace task or a challenge, and those can happen in school. Virtual work experience is also now a thing. So if you work for an organisation that's able to provide an encounter or an experience to young people, it doesn't have to be a full week of hosting. The enterprise advisor working with your child's school, that's the role I mentioned earlier, be a great person to speak to. And there are so many innovative approaches that schools are happy to accommodate, especially after the pandemic, which of course showed us different ways of working. To help your child with a work experience placement, you could try a networking activity, and in your PDF on page 10, there's an activity to get you thinking about the people you know who may be able to help. So moving on to the last two of those 8 Gatsby benchmarks, and these are the ones that are underpinning all of the work that your child's school is doing around careers education. We've got here encounters with further and higher education. So some young people with additional needs may be able to achieve a range of level 2 qualifications. So that's your grade 4 and above at GCSE. And that means that they may be able to access higher or further education. So for those students, the ability to hear from FE and HE institutions is key to helping them aim high and raise aspirations. Other young people may not be cognitively able to achieve those qualifications, so they should have access to providers of suitable courses and opportunities. Some FE colleges will be able to offer additional entry-level or level 1 courses, for example. And then finally, benchmark 8, personal guidance. That's provided by the qualified careers advisor that I mentioned before. Students must have a guidance interview by the age of 16, so before the end of year 11, and again by the age of 18. However, schools often provide additional access to a careers advisor for students when there are important decisions to be made. So options in year 9 is an example for that. So one of the key objectives for the webinar is to cover the kinds of career outcomes and opportunities available for young people with additional needs. So I want to have a look briefly at the big trends that are shaping the world of work first, before looking specifically at the local context. And that's because even if your child is much more likely to stay local, the way they live and work will be affected by these big trends. So essentially, we know that there are these significant trends that are going to shape the workforce of the future, such as the climate emergency. That includes energy, biodiversity, agriculture, health, pollution, water supply, and global warming. In an aging population, as I've got there at the second bullet point, most countries across the globe are experiencing a drop in fertility rate. At the same time, people are living longer. So the aging population is going to affect the way we all live and work. Migration, there, third on the list, that's going to continue to increase, for example, because of global warming. That's going to affect us all. And the fourth industrial revolution, so specifically around artificial intelligence and robotics, that's also going to affect the way that we live and work. So looking at skills for the future then, talked briefly about the kind of macro elements that we need to consider. So let's have a look at the skills. So today's most desired skills, according to the World Economic Forum, include things like creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, agility, curiosity, leadership, dependability, and attention to detail. And I've just gone through that list. You're probably already thinking, does my child have any of those skills? And I expect that they do, because many of these are qualities that young people with SEND possess naturally or can acquire through the experiences that they have. And as parents, we can help by making sure that our children recognise what skills and attributes they have, or when they're using those skills, so they can explain to an employer with confidence what they're capable of. And on page 11 of your PDF, you'll find further details. So that's current skills that are desired by employers. Having a look here at future skills. So these are the skills for the future that were published in 2024, very recently, by the World Economic Forum, which is a great source of information. And I'm sure you'll be scanning through now to see if your child's already demonstrating or learning those skills. Quality control used to feature in the top 10, as well as dependability and attention to detail. But although they're not in the top 10, they're still important skills. AI and big data, you see there at number 3, that's a new entry, as well as technological literacy, and both of which are, of course, a sign of the times. And I mentioned AI in a previous slide, because, of course, data increasingly drives everything we do. And AI is becoming more and more of a presence in the world of work. An example, actually, is recruitment. Applicant screening is increasingly managed by machine. AI looks through CVs. And there are recorded elements such as video interviews, which can also be assessed by AI. And often the first time a human will have engaged in real time in the recruitment process is when an in-person interview happens. The good news for young people with additional needs is that there are many desirable skills which are not dependent on high levels of cognition, literacy, and numeracy. Curiosity, for example, which is there at the top on the right, is a hugely valuable attribute and something that many young people with additional needs, autism, for example, have in abundance. Special interests can lead to expertise, which is highly sought after. Chris Packham, for example, the BBC Nature Watch presenter, is an excellent example of someone whose childhood obsession with or passion for insects has led to a very successful career outcome. I'm also aware of a paleontologist whose childhood interest in dinosaurs lasted well beyond his peers and has resulted in him working for a very well-known museum. So creative thinking, as I've already mentioned, is something that neurodivergent people can excel at. After all, it's the ability to overcome a problem from a different angle, see the possible in something that other people might view as impossible. Oksana Masters, we've got referenced on this slide, somebody who was born with significant physical impairments, who's currently America's greatest female Paralympic athlete. And she's extremely quotable, so she's got a lot to say about the kinds of skills that people with additional needs have, and the importance of creating the right mindset, a mindset for growth and success. So she says here, it doesn't matter what kind of body you have, it's the determination and spirit that's going to get you there, and I want to prove that. She also said, among many things that she said, the impossible is just a mindset, and knowing that you just need to start is the key to accomplishing anything in life. Other so-called soft skills like communication, problem solving, critical thinking, intrapersonal skills and leadership, they'll continue to be very important as we move into the future, and they're not linked to qualifications. There are, and there will continue to be, plenty of jobs at entry level and above in sectors such as healthcare, construction, agriculture, hospitality, and engineering. Further good news for young people with additional needs is that employers are increasingly realizing that attitude is more important than grades, and attributes are more valuable than a list of extracurricular activities. So in your PDF on pages 34 and 35, there are 2 tables which show the different kinds of career outcomes that can be on offer for young people with additional needs. Group 1 includes young people who will gain entry-level and level 1 qualifications with perhaps 1 or 2 level 2 grades at 4 or above. We have to group people in this way because there will be career pathways that are not open to them because they require specific grades or qualifications on entry. There may be cognitive or social, emotional, and mental health challenges, which means that a young person should look at group 1 career outcomes, at least initially. Any young person with additional needs who is able to achieve multiple level 2 qualifications, with some going on to achieve even up to level 8 PhD, they'll be in the group 2 category in terms of career outcomes. So we do have to be careful, however, that we don't assume that young people with additional needs in group 2 have easier access to those career outcomes, because many of those young people will require additional support to achieve their chosen career outcome or pathway. An excellent example of a hurdle that can prevent some young people from achieving group 2 career outcomes is the driving test. Young people with dyslexia, for example, may find the driving theory test extremely difficult to pass, which means that there are currently roles which will be out of their reach, despite their achievement of various level 2 and 3 qualifications, for example. I've listed here the kinds of additional support that might be needed. More good news comes from the Disability Confidence Scheme, the Right to Work programme, and the fact that employers are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of putting in place additional support for individuals with additional needs. And that will to help is supported by legislation such as the 2010 Equality Act, which sets out 9 protected characteristics, including disability. One of the reasons that employers are becoming increasingly engaged is data, which suggests that hiring people with additional needs is actually good for business. For example, the charity MenCap published the results of some significant and recent surveys which demonstrated that 87% of customers would rather give custom to organisations which hire diversity. 92% of customers, also on the slide there, think more highly of a company hiring disabled people. Furthermore, employees with learning difficulties take less time off sick. They're 3.5 times even more likely to stay in their role. They're less likely to be late, and they increase staff morale by 72%. Ways employers can help, including these on the list on the slide, include allowing virtual CVs. So an applicant can send a video version, for example, rather than a written list of qualifications. The HR department can complete a needs assessment to make the reasonable adjustments needed. There can be on-the-job assessment, a longer induction, and the probation period can be supported. So plenty of interventions available. So we must also remember that enterprise represents an exciting career opportunity for young people with special educational needs and disabilities. This is because setting up your own business doesn't require specific qualifications, so it's accessible to a greater number of people. Enterprise suits those who have a flair for problem solving and creative thinking, skills that many young people with additional needs have. Enterprise activities enable people to create something that works for them and can be the solution if a young person is struggling to find the right fit in an organisation. We've included some real examples on page 30 of your PDF in our Gallery of Inspiration page, such as John's Crazy Socks, which came into existence because John couldn't find the right fit in an existing organisation. There's also Colette, who set up her own bakery, hence the cookies on this slide, and local to me, Pops Cards, which is a micro business set up by a young man called Charlie. He found that his unique experience of autism meant that working away from people was necessary. And he's got an incredible skill for fine work and detail. So he makes intricate pop-up cards, which are just amazing, which his mum sells at craft fairs. So we've now come to the final outcome on our list for this webinar, which is to provide some thoughts and suggestions to support your career conversations with your child. To start us off, we can consider this diagram, which represents the Japanese concept of ikigai, which you may have already heard of. You can find images of ikigai all over the internet. So this is just our version with the same headings, of course, and you can see it in your PDF on page 27. The idea for all of us is that we basically find our way into the middle, to that wonderful place of fulfillment where you're living your purpose. Iki means life and gai means worth or value. So sometimes people use this Japanese philosophy quite narrowly, applying it only to sort of the traditional definition of career. But as we've explained, our view is that career is holistic. So we would use ikigai, we like to think, in the way that perhaps the Japanese originally intended, to apply to all the different elements of our lives. So we think this ikigai concept is a great tool for conversation. We've included it in your personal companion, and we've included a link to a site which lists lots of useful questions that you could use to form part of a conversation with your child about the different aspects of those ikigai spheres, and you could pick the ones that are relevant to your child's circumstances. Another suggestion is to make the focus of the ikigai conversation someone else. Your child might be interested in exploring how you or another member of the family is trying to get into the middle. Your child could then pose the questions and become familiar with the ideas before thinking about it themselves. That might be a less confrontational approach. I know from experience that setting up a structured conversation with a teenage child can make them feel a bit defensive, no matter how carefully we are in introducing the idea. So stress-free conversations, excuse me, that's what we want. So I remember a conversation about next steps I tried to have with my eldest. That went really badly because despite the fact that I know her very well and I know the subject very well, I made plenty of classic mistakes. I didn't think about the timing, for example. Didn't think about what her agenda might be or how suitable the materials were that we were using for her needs. As a parent, I was kind of blinded by my own agenda and my own concern about her future. So I've collected over the next few slides a list of tips or suggestions to support the next steps conversations that you might have with your child. We know perhaps only one or two might be effective because every child is different, every parent and child relationship is different, and the additional needs that your child experiences adds a further dimension. So our first suggestion is to use a tool because that makes the conversation less personal. We've shared with you already the Ikigai tool, and that's in your PDF on page 25. There's a Wheel of Life tool. The explanation for that is on page 19 and page 20. And I found actually just a simple table with headings worked really well for my middle child when we were looking at GCSE choices, because she responded better to a document that she'd filled in and we allocated points for each entry than she did to any conversation we had. So we know that for some young people with additional needs, talking through something is challenging. So an option is to use paper instead, write it down. I've actually held silent conversations with one of my children. So we sat next to each other and we write everything down. So we don't speak at all. And we just pass the paper between each other. And writing is another tool, really. And it gives the child more choice because they can decide what they'd like to write on and what they'd like to write with. We usually sort of push that piece of paper backwards and forwards, but you could do it via email, for example, or by text or WhatsApp, and just ask and answer questions and make comments as you go. So a few more tips. Virtual conversations. So I've mentioned email and WhatsApp already. So virtual conversations can be a really good option, and that's worked really well for me with one of my children. They'd rather stay in their room and talk to me via Zoom. So we literally set up Zoom in the house. Doesn't want to get up and leave their cozy space. And so meeting a child where they are can help get the conversation started more easily rather than removing them from where they're feeling comfortable and safe and having a conversation somewhere else. So we've added location, just to really emphasize that. So for example, we struggled to get my son to read. He's 12 at the moment, but he's far more open to the idea of reading if he can choose where we sit. So his current favorite place is at the top of the stairs, and we just sit on our pillows. That links with this idea of offering a choice. Sometimes I'll say, look, we need to have this conversation about X. So when would you like to do that? And I try to use inclusive language as well. It's never you need to, it's always we need to, or shall we, or why don't we? Anything that avoids putting pressure or putting the spotlight on my children tends to work better. So some more tips here. We've also got timing here, as well as that inclusive language that I've just been talking about, that we and us. So the timing, I've put timing is everything, because you obviously want to avoid having a conversation when your child is tired, overwrought, or overwhelmed. So my son prefers a countdown. actually. He likes to know we've got 80 minutes before we have to do the thing. So he can work out what activities he can get done beforehand. I've focused on speaking and writing as a way of having a careers conversation with your child. But one effective option, and I know this from talking to other parents and educators, for example, is to literally take a walk. It again means that the focus isn't entirely on the conversation. The conversation is happening at the same time as the activity that you're doing. So that can reduce pressure and stress. You can plan the walk carefully to help the conversation, particularly if your child's at the exploration stage of their career development, thinking about what they like and don't like doing. So just experiencing different places, sights, sounds and smells can help your child to recognise what works for them and what doesn't work. So I had a conversation with a careers coordinator once who was telling me about how powerful what this sort of learning walk can be for students who find it difficult to make a decision or who have little self-awareness. And you can find some further suggestions and some helpful links on page 24 and page 25 of your PDF. Another slide here. We speak to schools about building vocational profiles. So this is a file which has lots of information about your child to help their career development. And in that profile might go their likes, their dislikes, their experiences, their qualifications, the key people in their lives, their achievements, their ambitions, and so on. And this is something that can be created and amended over time. And if your child's school uses this approach, the more information you can provide them, the better. And the profile can also act as a tool to help structure a next steps conversation. You'll find a link to vocational profiles on page 27 in your PDF. And finally there, something I found really works is to look at what a young person doesn't like and what they don't want, without making a joke at the expense of teenagers. Sometimes it's easier to identify something they reject, whether it's a particular place, a job, a smell, a colour. So perhaps instead of starting next steps conversations with what would you like to do, we should try what really doesn't sound great, or what don't you like, or what don't you want to do. So that's my final tip. So we've reached the end of this webinar, which is focused on supporting you as parents to support your child's career development journey. We hope you found the content and approach useful. We hope that you've picked up lots of tips that you think you can try with your child. We hope that we've given you more of a sense of what's happening in your child's school and of the range of professionals who are supporting your child and the kinds of opportunities that the National Career Strategy sets out for your child to experience. We've been Careers Collective for South Yorkshire Careers Hub as part of the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. Thank you very much for spending time listening to this webinar, and all the best to you in supporting your child as they move forward with their career development journey. Thank you very much.